In the world of food and nutrition, change often happens pretty incrementally. And then sometimes it really feels like the ground is shifting beneath your feet. And 2025 felt decidedly more like the latter. Today, I'm taking a look back at the biggest food and nutrition trends of the last year and peeking into my crystal ball to see if I can detect what the future might have in store for us. Hello, and welcome to the Nutrition Diva podcast. I'm your host, Monica Reinagel, and as we prepare to turn the page on 2025 and welcome a new year, I've been reflecting on the food and nutrition news and trends of the last year to see if I can detect any big themes. And here are a couple of things that jump out at me. After more than a decade of viewing everything through the lens of our gut bacteria, our microbiome obsession seems to be leveling out, and instead, GLP-1s and their impacts on both medicine and culture have become the dominant forces in the conversation about food and nutrition. For example, the focus on fiber has given way to the prioritization of protein. Dramatic weight loss, through any means, tends to result in fairly significant loss of lean muscle tissue. And if you're over 50, you're probably already losing lean muscle tissue. In either case, the best way we know to prevent this is to have people increase the amount of high-quality protein they take in. And, by the way, that strategy works much better when you combine it with strength training. So between the growing number of people utilizing anti-obesity medications to lose weight and an aging population that's worried about muscle loss, protein has become the dietary darling of the decade. Virtually every food you can think of, from your latte to your granola to your pasta, now comes in a high-protein version. Which brings me to the next big theme that I've noticed. This time last year, it seemed like it was only a matter of time before UPFs, or ultra-processed foods, were officially written into public health policy as the source of all evils. But a growing drumbeat of dissent, including from this podcast, has finally managed to slow that roll a bit. Because consumers seem to have grasped something that researchers and policymakers have been a lot slower to recognize, namely that UPFs include a very wide variety of foods, some of which are actually really helpful in trying to meet nutrient targets. So thankfully, we're seeing a shift from the blanket demonization of food processing towards a more discerning stance toward functional foods. So a protein powder may be highly processed, but if it's helping to prevent sarcopenia or muscle loss, it's not the problem. It is part of the solution. So to me, both of these trends, the rise of GLP-1s and a shift toward more functional foods, suggest an interesting swing of the pendulum. Even before this recent focus on food processing, we have long placed a high value on doing things the natural way. I have lost track of how many emails I've gotten from listeners over the years wanting to know what vitamin or food or herb they could use instead of taking a blood pressure medication or a cholesterol-lowering drug. Well, now all of a sudden, the biggest problem seems to be that people can't get access to the medications that they feel will make their lives better. So as a result, we're seeing an explosion of compounders and telehealth companies, especially in the anti-obesity medicine space. So this shift from mistrust of pharmaceuticals to widespread demand has again been driven largely by those anti-obesity medications. The initial suspicion and stigmatization around using these medications has given way to the recognition that people who have struggled with their weight their entire lives were not just suffering from a lack of self-control. There was an actual biological or metabolic problem, one that these medications are able to address. But of course, this still leaves the question of why these particular biological and metabolic issues seem to have exploded in the second half of the 20th century. And the answer here is starting to come into clearer focus. The post-World War II modernization of the food supply and of consumer households was abetted by the introduction of massive amounts of chemicals and new materials into our environment. Chemical fertilizers increased our crop yields, and non-stick and stain-resistant coatings brought miracle convenience to our cookware and our fabrics. Plastics made products lighter, cheaper, and more durable. Now, it was another 30 or 40 years before the consequences of all of that started to become apparent. And these consequences continue to be revealed. Everything from the effect of forever chemicals on our cancer risks to the influence of hormone disruptors on obesity and fertility, to the impact of microplastics on our brains. And this can be pretty scary because at this point, avoidance of these compounds is virtually impossible. And I think that's why I'm also seeing an uptick in interest in things like regenerative agriculture. Because it's not just about putting fewer chemicals and plastics into the environment, although that would certainly help. It's about adopting practices that help the earth to heal from the way that we've been treating her. Multiple surveys and market reports confirm that consumer awareness of regenerative agriculture has doubled just in the last year. So it's moving from a niche farming term to a primary purchase driver for many health-conscious shoppers. So what's in store for 2026 and beyond? Well, while we continue to grapple with the fallout of environmental degradation, at least we are also starting to glimpse a future in which obesity and all of its related health issues is no longer the primary public health battle. We're already seeing declines in junk food and fast food purchases as eating behaviors and food preferences are shifting. And as a result, food companies are thinking less about how to make their products so hard to resist and more about how to make them more nutrient dense. And as people lose weight, they gain mobility. They tend to show a greater interest and enjoyment of physical activity. And this could accelerate the demand for more walkable or bike-friendly communities and more active recreation. And it's kind of fun to think about the kinds of civic and commercial initiatives that a healthier and more active population might engender. Now, of course, there are a lot of trends and cutting-edge technologies that I haven't touched on today. Things like the exploding role of artificial intelligence in food and nutrition, the continuing growth of sobriety as a lifestyle choice and not just as a treatment for addiction, and advances in food technology ranging from gene-edited produce, lab-cultured meat, printing food with 3D printers, precision fermentation, even farming in space. No doubt these will be topics that we'll be taking a closer look at here on the podcast in 2026. Until then, allow me to wish you a happy new year from the entire team here at the Nutrition Diva podcast and Quick and Dirty Tips. Holly Hutchings is our director of podcasts. Steve Riekeberg is the audio engineer. Morgan Christensen heads up podcast operations and advertising. Rebecca Sebastian is our manager of marketing and publicity. And Nat Hoops is our marketing and operations assistant. Thanks as always to all of them, but most of all, thanks to you for listening, and Happy New Year.